I'm taking a look here at the newest game from VentoNuovo Games, which is 1914, Germany at War. This time they've taken their block games to the Western Front of World War I. The game covers the first 4 months of the Western Front from August to November 1914. Unlike blocks in the East and the other blocks World War II games, this system is diceless, so it's all done with strength points, which may be affected by terrain and things like that. So it makes it for much more of a, and it is area control as opposed to hex also, and it makes things very much, I don't want to say chess-like, that's such an overused term, and I don't know how accurate it is in terms of, certain numbers of blocks can only occupy certain spaces. It has a hard stacking limit, and you have to move your leaders before you move the rest of your units, and your leaders count against the stacking limit. So it has kind of an interesting effect here, as I've learned on the first turn with the Germans. As you can see here, I've got a couple of leaders in these spaces, and currently leaders only add the number of dots, or in this case stars, that they have. They only add that to adjacent combats, so you usually want to kind of get your leaders adjacent, as in here. You usually want to get your leaders adjacent to where to a space where combat's going to happen, which is what happened here. However, you'll find that once you've planned those initial moves, and you're moving your combats further on, that you may actually not be able to move your leaders forward, because those adjacent spaces are maximum stacked by your troops. So you have to move your troops out of there. As in the case here, I had some units here, had some units here, but these were all stacked up. So on the next, after that first turn of engagement, so after that turn, I couldn't advance my leaders up because my units were filling up those spaces. So I ended up having to, as you can see here, advance 4 more German units that were here, advance them over into this space. But that happens after leader movement. So now, your troops have advanced out beyond your leaders. So it kind of creates this interesting scenario where you may get that leader bonus in combat on the first round of fighting, and then discover that, oh, I need to move them up and fight them again, but now without the leaders, because the leaders are more than 1 hex away before I'll be able to move them again. So that was something that I ran into right away on the first turn. And as you can see here, it's a pretty, so far, historical opening. You have the Germans advancing through the Ardennes up here and into Belgium. They quickly took Namur and Liège over there, and have now moved on to Antwerp. Actually, not Antwerp, Brussels. Antwerp is in that far northern province up there. There's a fortress there, and that will probably be the last point that they'll hit. And then just south of Brussels here, and try and move into this Lille-Maubeuge space before the Allies can get enough there to defend it. Which, as you can see, the Entente have landed. The British troops actually start over there in London, and you have to burn a strategic move right off the bat if you want to get them all over to Calais, or conversely, you can drop them off over here. I chose to put them in Calais so that I could move them quickly into this double fortress hex, because if the enemy takes fortress spaces, they get something called Valor Points for that, and Valor Points add combat bonuses. In this case, you store your Valor Points, these little white cubes, over in your quote-unquote capital space. Since Berlin doesn't actually fit on the map, the Germans use Frankfurt as their sort of de facto capital for the game. And you can see the Germans have already picked up 2 Valor Points from Namur and Liege. So the French are already kind of in a hole there, or the Entente is already kind of in a hole there because they have not acquired Valor Points yet. So I need to get over here, and as you can see, there's 2 fortresses in that space, which is bad news if the Entente gives that space up too easily. So we will get the British troops in there, and then in the process try and move some French forces up to support them. Now, as you can see here, these guys that are face up, they actually did some fighting in that space, or in those spaces rather, even though I knew the odds were not particularly good, which, it being a block game, you don't know exactly what your opponent's going to have. But if you don't have a significant advantage in points, you're certainly not going to win, and possibly not even do any damage to your opponent. In which case, you can have in this game contested spaces, so that's why these guys are face up. If you do not destroy all the blocks in the hex, or your opponent does not retreat, and yet they're still alive, as you can see the French are there, the space will remain contested, which means you both will occupy the space and can fight in that space on the following turn, or on the next impulse. So, however, if you don't win the combat, then you have to keep your forces face up. So, your opponent's always going to know what you have there if you don't win decisively in a particular space. And the defender can re-hide his forces. However, if he attacks on the following phase or impulse and doesn't win, then same result, and you're both sitting there face up. But the reason I did that with the Germans down here, where they really don't have a good chance of actually winning or breaking through, was to force these French troops to keep them from positioning. If you leave a contested space, it costs you an extra movement point. So having the German forces in these spaces makes it a little bit harder for the French to get out and move them freely up into some of these northern spaces to try and stem the German advance through Belgium, or have something there to contest the German advance through Belgium. So as it is, they'll have to pull some guys probably here from Verdun and Neufchâteau there. These guys down here are a little too far away to be of much effective use. And then, of course, you've got reinforcements. The French don't have a lot. They have an entire corps, though, of reserves that you can bring in. And the way you bring in reinforcements is with something down here called the initiative disc, which currently the Germans have. If you can play this initiative disc to do certain things. So on the first turn, the Germans played the initiative disc to get something called a first turn German surprise move, which gives them a little extra movement through Luxembourg and Belgium to enact the Schlieffen Plan. And so they end up giving this to the French on the first turn to use that. The French then ended up giving it back to the Germans because the French did a strategic move on their first turn to bring all the Brits over. So now the Germans have it back. The Germans have just gone. They still retained the initiative disc, so the Entente cannot utilize it this turn to attempt to reduce any forces to build garrisons or things like that. And actually, I think the reinforcements are actually not done on. Now let me look at the secrets of play here. I thought, yeah, it does say here. So you can do a strategic action by playing the impulse disc, and one of those is calling for reinforcements and randomly selecting units from that pool. The other way you get reinforcements is at the beginning of the turn, but since there's only, and not the first turn, so you only have 3 turns or 3 opportunities where you can call for reinforcements at the start of a turn. Otherwise, you have to spend the initiative disc to do it. So as you can see, there's a goodly handful of French reinforcements, only 2 British reinforcements. But over there, you can see the Germans have a lot more in terms of reinforcements. So So the French will be hard pressed. Also, you can see here, though, it takes more destroyed units. These are the dead pools here. Once this is full, the Entente loses. As you can see, once that's full, the Germans lose. So the Germans can only lose 10 units. I think there's like 14, 16 units here for the Entente. So they can lose a few more guys before they lose the game, but not too many. And especially because the Germans are generally a little more powerful. And that can be dangerous for the Entente. So Valor Points, the first turn or the first side to collect 10 Valor Points wins the game. That seems like it'd be fairly difficult to achieve, because I believe you can only get Valor Points through capturing fortresses or capital cities. So the Germans have more opportunities there, getting fortresses in Belgium and the capital of Belgium, as well as potentially getting Paris itself. I think any star city, I think, also provides a Valor Point. So Versailles there, Rouen, other points, other major cities that have potential for Valor Points. So that's just a quick look. I'm only a couple impulses into the first turn, but I can see it's very, very geared towards where you set up specific units. And it's interesting because the setup is, as you can see on the map, marked, but only the type. So 3 infantry units and a leader go there, but you don't know what 3 infantry units they are. They're randomly selected from that particular corps. So they're all color coded, so you know which corps are going to start where, but you don't know which specific units of those corps are going to start where. And so that could have a huge impact on setting up the game. And a big part of a game like this, which doesn't use dice, is in those setup moves. So if you don't do things just so, that could really end up affecting the whole campaign, because you'll be kind of locked. Then it becomes sort of one of those puzzle box type, not a puzzle box, but one of those puzzle games where you have like one open space and you have to shift all the tiles around on the board to make the pattern emerge. And that's kind of what this turns into with these hard stacking limit maximums. On the spaces with the red shields on them, you can only stack 2 blocks. On the gold shields, I believe, you're also limited to 2 blocks. So, and then the red shields cost 2 to move through. The gold ones only cost 1 to move through. But those stacking limits, the green shields you can stack 4 blocks. So these stacking limits here make it difficult for the Germans to move their large army through these spaces or to utilize their leaders as well. So it's a very interesting process of trying to make your offensives work with the way that stacking works. It becomes very puzzle-like, and trying to figure out your sequence of, okay, I got to move. I can move if I want to move a leader up, since you have to move leaders first. In these 2 limit zones, you got to make sure, okay, I need to move up. I need to make sure I only have 1 guy. If I need to move people through those zones with the stacking limit of 2, I need to make sure I've only got 1 guy there, or 1 leader there, so then I can run units through one at a time without overstacking. So you don't want to put 2 guys in there and then realize, oh crap, or 2 leaders in there and realize, oh crap, I've blocked units from actually moving through this area because I've got leaders in the way, that I had to move first. So very, very puzzle-like in my mind. So I can see that either being frustrating to some people or delightful to some people, depending on how much you like that kind of thinking. So like I said, just a few impulses into the first turn. We'll see how it develops over the longer game, and I'll come back and kind of wrap up some concluding thoughts.